Good afternoon. My name is Murat Sönmez. I'm a member of the Managing Board of the World Economic Forum and head of the new center we established in San Francisco on the Fourth Industrial Revolution. It's a privilege and pleasure to welcome all of you to our session on achieving inclusive growth in the Fourth Industrial Revolution, which is not only the theme of this session, but the whole meeting. As we know, the Fourth Industrial Revolution is impacting every aspect of life, from business to society to government, and even to who we are and our own identity. But as we move forward in the Fourth Industrial Revolution, we cannot leave people behind. And achieving inclusive growth is essential just to make sure that everybody participates in the benefits of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, and also we minimize the downside of it. And our distinguished panelists will discuss that today. This is the reason why the World Economic Forum decided to open a center dedicated to this topic in San Francisco, taking a look at specific technologies with a human-centric approach and identifying the positive impact to the citizens and to the society, and working backwards to develop the governance protocols and the policy frameworks to make sure that we accelerate the positive impact and minimize the negative impact. It is an applied research center where we sit down with industry leaders, government leaders, startups, international organizations, top research universities, and co-design these protocols and implement them through pilot implementations. We all welcome, we all invite you, all of you, to join us at the center and reach out to your counterparts at the World Economic Forum if you're interested. With that, I'll hand over the session to my colleague, Nick Davis, to kick it off. Nick, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Murat, and thank you everyone for being here. This session is titled the same as the theme of this conference, Achieving Inclusive Growth in the Fourth Industrial Revolution. And I want to start by reminding us all that science and technology are not ends in themselves. Neither, really, is economic progress. The point of us being here as part of the World Economic Forum network and community, the point of the activities that we do when we're not lucky enough to sit here and talk about technology, is really to improve our own and others' lives in different ways. And possibly the greatest challenge of any industrial revolution is making sure that those who are normally vulnerable or excluded are able to participate in it. And so the topic of discussion and the challenge for this panel is to ask ourselves the question, what do we need to do to make the ongoing revolution in emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence and biotechnologies, 3D printing, neurotech, space exploration, and new frontiers in almost every part of science, how do we make sure that those are truly inclusive and able to benefit the largest number of people? And it's a fantastic opportunity to sit here and discuss this in China. Not just because China is a world leader in science and technology, but you may know that China and the economic progress, the improvement in living standards here in this country over the last 30 years was responsible for more than half, well more than half of the global increase in living standards and reduction in numbers of people in poverty. And so it's here that we have four fantastic distinguished panelists to give us a vision, but not just a vision, some practical ideas about what all of us can do to help achieve that sense of inclusion, those real benefits to people around the world as a result of the exciting technology that many of you are working on and developing. And to do this, we have Deputy Prime Minister Tharman from Singapore, who's also the Coordinating Minister for Social and Economic Affairs. We have Jean Liu, who is the President of Didi Chuxing, a very well-known and exciting ride-sharing company and more here in China. We have the member of the Forum's Board of Trustees, but also Chairman, CEO, and founder of Salesforce, Mark Benioff, and a close friend of the forum as well. And finally, the distinguished economist Tyler Cowen, Professor of Economics from George Mason University. And I hope that this will be an opportunity for the panelists to have a little bit of a debate and a challenge to each other and to you as well before we finish in about 48 minutes' time. I'm going to open by turning to first speaker on my left here, Deputy Prime Minister Tarman, maybe to set the stage for us a little bit. What is the current context for inclusive growth? Where do we stand today, and what worries and excites you?
Well, thanks a lot. I think the broad description of the problem is first one of middle-class stagnation across a broad range of the more advanced economies. And second, it has to be emphasized because it's not sufficiently noticed, is the fact that we haven't had much catch-up from most of the developing world with the advanced world. The conventional theories of economic development just haven't played out, with the exception of 4 smaller Asian economies in the 70s and 80s, and now coastal China. But those are exceptions. If you look at Africa, if you look at the broad swath of South Asia, if you look at Latin America, there's been very little movement relative to the frontier. Let's say if you look at American levels of productivity and incomes, and if you look at what's happened since the 60s till now, there's been very little movement, very little convergence from less developed in the direction of, or in catching up with the most developed. Globalization, national economies just haven't played out in the way they should. The source of the problem, we know for the first issue of middle-class stagnation, is weak productivity growth. And that's something which economists on the left and right would agree on, that if you don't have sustained uplift of productivity growth, we're not going to get an uplift of median incomes or incomes of the broad middle. That, I think, we agree on. The source of that problem is that we actually don't have that much disruption happening in our economies. Despite all that's said about Google and Facebook and the latest developments in AI, the spread of new technologies isn't that wide. The internet may appear to be everywhere, but it's not really used that intensively. And most new technologies escape the large, small, and medium enterprise sector of most economies, and they escape whole sectors, apart from a few leaders in each sector. So the diffusion of new technologies has not been rapid, and large parts of the advanced economies, in fact, most economies, don't have enough disruption. So we need more disruption. Second problem, the lack of catch-up and lack of convergence, I would say, also reflects a lack of globalization. In fact, most of Africa, most of South Asia, most of Latin America is not inserted in the global economy. They are inserted within semi-protected economies, or they're just not part of a market economy. So we need more disruption, more technological innovation, and more globalization, a little contrary to what some of the magazine articles will tell us. But it's only going to work if we have more activist social strategies as well, which is a domestic policy imperative. Because without active social compacts formed through federal and local government initiative and public-private initiatives, it's very difficult for us to sustain an era of greater disruption, because jobs and firms will be disrupted, and to sustain globalization and bring it up to a new level, including a much larger part of the world. And I think that the interesting story coming out of the last few years, when you think of activist social policies, it's not just traditional redistribution, about 1% against 99 or 10 against 90, and how you go about redistributing. It's about the failure to regenerate towns and the failure to integrate neighborhoods in a whole range of countries. If you look at the Brexit vote, if you look at the US presidential elections last year, if you look at even voting patterns in Istanbul, Paris, Moscow, a whole range of places. Voting patterns are very different in the largest, most cosmopolitan cities compared to the suburbs, the smaller towns, and the countryside. Starkly different in Brexit, starkly different in the US presidential elections. And that's telling us something. We have to think about the local. We have to think about how we help local communities regenerate themselves. And the traditional methods of redistribution just don't do it. It has to be about specialization, has to be about capabilities, it has to be about communities of learning and communities of mutual help. Mm-hmm. And that works at a local level. It very rarely works at a continental scale economy or a national level. But it works at a local level because people know each other, you know who the employers are, the employers know who's in the community college or the universities or high schools. You can actually form a community of learning, a community of mutual help. And far more attention in social policy, federal and local, across a whole range of countries has to be paid to these local factors, regenerating communities, because disruption will have to be part of life. Mm-hmm. If it's not part of life, we're going to get stuck at low productivity growth, and we're going to get stuck at incomes that just don't change from one generation to another, or start slipping, which is what's happened. Finally, just one quick point, because the biggest issue is really about the emerging world and the developing world and the lack of catch-up. And we have to think very hard there of how we use technology to make access to the modern world and to make access to global markets much easier and much cheaper for small enterprise and for individuals. And the good thing is that it can be done. Broadband can be put in place, high-speed broadband. Regulatory systems can be changed so as to protect incumbents less and encourage new players to come in, because competition is quite essential in the IT space and in the technology space generally. It's what promotes innovation. In fact, there's a long way to go in regulatory reform in a whole range of developing countries to be able to bring in new technologies faster, and the real beneficiary, we know who the losers are amongst incumbents, but the real beneficiary is a much broader swath of small players and individuals. And we have to make this move because the consequences are dire if we don't achieve this. It's not just about some countries being left behind. It's going to be consequences of a geopolitical nature. Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, Tarman. So taking us from the big picture context of the challenges facing us down to some of the innovations in policy, as well as the old tasks that we know that we still have yet to complete in economic policy as well on that. So, Jean, you are one of the disruptors that Tarman talked about there. And here in China, you have a grand vision for the sharing economy and mobility. Talk us through how your version of this fits into inclusivity and inclusive growth.
Thank you. I totally agree with Deputy Prime Minister on disruption. I think we do need more disruption on technology and on business model. But at the end of the day, we need to figure out why do we need those. We need those to benefit humanity, to serve every individual in this room. So in our daily work, what we're trying to do, which is to maximize the benefit of technology and sharing economy to serve two purposes. So the first one is on the resource problem. That's the problem that's facing all human beings right now on this planet. For example, if all Beijing, Shanghai people want to copy the lifestyle of Los Angeles, then we will have a resource crisis again. So the sharing economy and the data science we are utilizing today is basically to improve the utilization rate of all the cars, of the road space, of all the energies. So that's the number one point. And I think without this new business model, we cannot imagine what will happen on resource. And second, more importantly, is from an economy perspective, what it's doing to all of us. Everyone knows China is going through this restructuring on economy. And actually on our platform, most of the drivers are part-time drivers. They earn the second income for their family. So they are young graduates who haven't figured out what they want to do for their lifetime. Mm-hmm. They're stay-at-home moms. They are coal miners who will lose their jobs very soon. Right? And in our platform, we provide them dignity for life. For example, about 2 million drivers on our platform earn at least $30 a day. And if you do a math, monthly rate is 3 times of China's minimum wage. Mm-hmm. So we help these people to transition for their next stop in their life. We're not saying they will do this job forever, but this is to prepare them for the next challenge. And from a bigger scale perspective, this is to prepare our economy for the next challenge. So it's not just serving as a landing cushion, it's also a launching pad for our economy. So that's what we're talking about these days.
And just as a follow-up to this, you're also been involved in other parts of the sharing economy, and I know that OFO and Mobike and similar schemes have started to take this using the Internet of Things approach to sharing bicycles. How fast is the sharing economy growing in China? What's the potential here that you see to transform cities and to perform other tasks?
It's huge. And after 5 years, we're a young company, very young company, but after 5 years, we provide 20 million rides on a daily basis, which is 2 times of the other markets adding up together. And it's not just to provide private car share, it's also taxi, minibus, buses, and bikes on our platform. So that's the other beauty of sharing economy. I think it also provides inclusive growth here, so everyone can have a fair access to mobility service. It's not just for higher income people. For lower income people can also have easier access to service they would like to enjoy.
Thank you. Turning to Mark, we've talked a little bit about the macro contextual problems. We've talked about a set of technologies here building on digital in the sharing economy, touching on IoT. But the fourth industrial revolution is being driven by lots of exciting and some unknown and uncertain technologies. When you look from where you are in San Francisco out into the world of emerging technology, where do you see some areas that we need to be excited and dynamic about, and where are some areas that we maybe need to be worried about inclusion and thoughtful before they come out?
Good. Okay, well, thanks, Nick. And first of all, let me reinforce what Murat said, which is that the World Economic Forum is building a very exciting new center in San Francisco in the Presidio, which is called the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution. It's based on many of the concepts that Nick wrote about in the books that you've seen published by the World Economic Forum with Klaus Schwab, and these incredible world-changing concepts in regards to the technology and shifts that are going on. And there's so many exciting new technologies that are emerging both in the biological sciences, as you know, and also information technology. The biggest, shift on the technology side that we can see happening today is certainly artificial intelligence, and artificial intelligence is growing now at just a much faster rate than ever expected. And it's not just machine intelligence, it's not just machine learning, it's also deep learning and other really incredible new characteristics of artificial intelligence, including vision and object detection and others. But this idea that there's this broad new platform, which is what AI is, it's this incredible new platform that I think that if any of us were to start our companies over again, we would start with the AI as the platform and build up. Today, many of us are including now and building AI within our existing platforms. That's probably true of almost every company that I'm thinking of today that's in the mainstream. And the artificial intelligence is going to have dramatic effects and dramatic changes on our society and dramatically improve not just our healthcare and not just our levels of productivity, but it's also going to be very disruptive. And I think a lot of us realize that it will also create an incredible crisis of equality. And this crisis of equality is going to really shake our society in many different areas. And the crisis of equality that artificial intelligence will bring will, I think, really make us look at some of the foundational aspects of society. Of course, we're going to probably look at things like basic income, but we're probably also going to look at things like how do we build new models of education and learning, especially as we start to displace more and more workers. We heard Premier Lee today speak about how as larger companies bring in these next generations of automation, that workers in many cases indeed are displaced, and that's why there's more of a reliance today on new business creation and next generation small and medium businesses. Well, I couldn't agree with him even more than that. He's absolutely right. But what I can also tell you is that this crisis of equality is going to also affect how we manage our companies and lead them. And I think we saw that playing out today or this week in the newspapers and the magazines around the world when we saw that Uber went through a significant change in their management structure, and the CEO was fired, and one of the board members left, and so forth. And what happened? Well, it wasn't that long ago, it was only in February, that there was really an incredible article written by one of their executives, Susan Fowler, who really just pointed out that they had created a culture that was not about equality. And it triggered inside a true fourth industrial revolution company, Uber, a crisis of equality. And you could see it start to play out to the point where women felt unsafe to work at Uber. And that is a terrible situation for any company, and it's certainly a terrible situation for women when they feel that way, that they don't feel safe in an organization. And this, I believe, is going to be reflected in society going forward. When we talk about inclusive growth, which is the title of this, what that means to me is equality. It means that we are including everybody. That is, we are including all genders, all races, all sexual orientations, everyone. We include everyone. We treat them equally. We give them equal opportunity. We pay them equally. You know, the World Economic Forum writes an incredible report. And if you haven't read some of the work that Sadia has done, I mean, the gender pay report, okay, says that it's going to still take us 170 years before we have gender pay equality. This should be a sign that we have throughout our organizations these very serious problems that need to be addressed today. So we must search for greater levels of equality within ourselves, and that this will be absolutely a critical and intrinsic part of this fourth industrial revolution. And if you think that any company or any country or any non-governmental organization will escape that crisis of equality, I assure you that none will. And that's kind of where I see it as of right now.
Thank you very much, Mark. And I want to come back to Jean in a minute to ask about how Didi is dealing with those same inclusion aspects in a fast-growing company here in China. But before I do, I'd like to turn to Tyler Cowan. Tyler, Taman opened by saying he was concerned about a lack of disruption, a lack of dynamism in the global economy, and you've written about the great stagnation, about the complacent classes, and in fact, in some of that work, pointed to the fact that technologies have had a role in perhaps distracting us or making us less dynamic, less attentive to some of the bigger problems around us. When we think about this challenge of inclusive growth and the need to be more dynamic, what's your take on what countries, what people, what organizations need to do? And how does it look from the economics perspective, from where you stand, looking at the data and not just at discussions and corporate culture?
If we look at most of the Western world, for at least 15 years, real wages for the middle class have been stagnant or in a few cases even falling. This is the most important fact of our times. So if you are reading that we are receiving a new technological cornucopia of incredible products, basically that cannot be true. It would be showing up in the real wages of most people. I think the United States in particular, we have an economy with several quite stagnant sectors. Healthcare, almost 18% of our GDP. It's incredible, the highest in the world, yet over the last 10 years, our mortality numbers have disappointed. They have come in below par. In many counties of my country, people are now dying sooner than they had 10 or 15 years ago. If you look at education, just ask a simple question. To date, how much has the internet improved education in the United States? The answer is not quite zero, but the biggest thing that goes on often is simply emailing your professor. There are now some MOOCs. We're not sure how well that will do. Most of education is unchanged. It's fairly stagnant. Simple core question for real people. What does it cost to buy a house in an above-average school district? Every year, this costs more. And that cost going up is actually far more significant than most of the benefits that tech has brought us. Just a simple number that's really striking. We've talked about Uber. Let me say in passing, I'm much more optimistic about Didi than Uber. But you look at Uber in the United States. Uber hired Steve Levitt, one of the most famous economists in the world, to do a study. What is the social benefit of Uber for each American on average? This is a study done by Uber. The answer was $20, which is fine, great, $20 per person. How many of us in this room have produced $20 of value for each American? But at the end of the day, that's just like a fluctuation in your electricity bill or a fraction of your property tax increase. It's not that big a deal. So the internet has made leisure much better. It's connected us to people much more. But it's very instructive to compare, say, the last 10 years of the internet to 1995, 1998, which I would say was the true information technology revolution. In those years, IT was very powerful, and you see output going up at a rate of higher than 3% in most sectors of the American economy. Right now, we're doing more with information, but so much of our economy resists improvement. Or look at government. We don't even know how to measure the quality of government. What does that tell you, right? Is government working hard to get us a means to do so? I would say not. In my country and many other countries, in my opinion, the quality of government probably is declining. So when you have such major sectors as healthcare, education, and government, either semi-stagnant or declining and disappointing, you can be doing a lot of things right. You can have heroic entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley, which I'm a big fan of, by the way. I love the big tech companies. I'm not anti-tech. But GDP is a huge mountain. And to make a dent in that mountain and have a growth rate of 3%, it's much, much harder than people realize. And right now, we are not there. We need more disruption. We need more entrepreneurship. And as we heard from Singapore, we need it for the whole world. Service sector productivity is stagnant. Even in Singapore, they cannot really get it to increase. And that tells you something. It is a hard problem.
Thank you, Tyler. So this is the problem we're faced with. And back to you, Jean, because you're at the heart of this in trying to move a mountain in many ways. What's your response to Tyler on this?
Sure. I think the key topic we were talking about is being inclusive here, and it's actually our company's philosophy. And I also want to address the point Professor Cohen just made. A lot of people think for our industry, ride-sharing, we compete with taxis fiercely, for example. But actually, it's not. We consider our philosophy is we should be inclusive of each other, and both taxis and ride-sharing should be an alternative to private car sharing. That's a solution to the private car. If you think about China, which is the country I'm most familiar with, we have 150 million private car owners, I would say. Actually, we have 200 million cars and private cars. And if you assume every driver drives 1.5 times a day, that's maximum already, that's 300 million drivers. And in our vision, transportation in the long run will become, as a matter of fact, a service rather than a form of ownership. Right? When transportation becomes a service, we can liberate all these car owners. Then we can engage more taxi drivers and rideshare drivers together to work for people like all of us here. So that's, that's being inclusive here. That's the benefit of being inclusive here. And it also will do a very good impact, utilizing technology and based on sharing economy, and will serve all the humanities. And the second part on the diversity, I'm very glad Mark talked about it. I think we're a company that truly believes in diversity. First of all, we are trying to go global. A lot of people are talking about Uber. We also see global market is the future market. But our philosophy is we have to create customer value. It's not, we want to go global and we have to. It's if we can bring value to people there. And to bring value, we have to study very deeply on, what local customers need. So we have to respect local diversity. And from a company's culture perspective, we also need to understand each employee, what's their insights, what's their inner growth driver. So for example, we have this women network, which I personally feel extremely passionate about. DD has 50% women employees and about 40% of senior women executives. So for example, we talk about how women can develop career in our company, and we encourage all the moms and pregnant women to take one day off to work from home, actually, every week. So that's from a company's perspective and also from an economic perspective, how we look at inclusive and diversity.
Perfect. So we're kind of orbiting around two of these important topics here, and I want to bring Taman back in to maybe bring us down one more level and picking up on Tyler's point about this really need to do something, this urgent need to do something. And yes, in Singapore, so I'm sure you have many experiences about how reforming education, reforming government to develop more dynamism, but also transmitting that across the world in different ways is part of what you mentioned in the globalization of some of these ideas. You mentioned a few ideas before, but what are some practical examples that we can hook onto and maybe take back with us to our home cities or elsewhere to learn from and build on together?
Well, I'd say a couple of things, and I say this not because Singapore's a model for the world in any sense, but it has worked in Singapore reasonably well, and there may be some interesting parallels with other cities. First, I think we have to reshape education and reverse the trend of over-academization that's taken place in the last 40 to 50 years almost everywhere, including in China and India. The overemphasis on the academic track, not just in schools, but in tertiary education, such that the four-year regular college education model has become dominant. It just doesn't meet the needs of the real world, and it doesn't meet the needs of the natural spectrum of abilities that we have in any society. We have to take a step back and ask, how do we develop the talents, skills, and enthusiasm of individuals in a way that's relevant to the real world, relevant to opportunities that face them in the market, or opportunities that they can create in the market? And it requires a much more flexible blend of the academic and the practical, and it requires reinvestment at different points of your life. Far too much is front-loaded now into the first 18 to 22 years of life. And I think we all agree that that investment, whilst useful in a general sense, depreciates quite quickly, and you've got to keep learning through life. But we don't have the infrastructure for learning through life. We don't have the financing schemes, and individuals are more or less on their own. Quite different from school, where you've got a teacher and a headmaster or principal. In fact, far too much management and shepherding that takes place in the early years. And then you're left on your own. You're left on your own once you're in adult life. We need more curation, more mentoring, more advice, and a lot of it can be done at a local community level. And we have to develop that system. Intermediaries, including intermediaries who are doing it for commercial reasons, who can help individuals shape their future learning. We need financing to be spread out from this take the over-concentration in the early years and spread it out more through life. So at regular intervals in life, people can learn. We're trying to do it in Singapore through what we call Skills Future. It's our most important social and economic initiative. It's not just economic, it's social. It's ultimately a more egalitarian way of developing people through life compared to the traditional forms of meritocracy, which take place largely in school systems.
Mark, you've worked a lot in the San Francisco and Bay Area with schools and on the topic of education with Salesforce. What have you learned here about the opportunity for inclusion, particularly in the area of emerging technologies, around new forms of education?
Well, I couldn't agree more with what my good friend from Singapore is talking about, and I hadn't heard the words over academicization. Is that what it is?
I think I just said that.
Yes. How do you say it? How do you pronounce it?
I won't try it again.
Okay. I can't pronounce it. But anyway, I love that. And I completely agree with that. And I think it's absolutely connected as well to my gentleman on my left who really talked about the crisis of growth. So, and I talked about the crisis of equality. And I'll try to start to weave these together and how they're related. So I think that, you know, when you start to look at what's going on, especially as these new technologies are coming in, and as I said, AI is kind of the mother of all technologies, you know, if you will, and I've also said that the speed of that is coming in is unprecedented. So you're going to get this kind of high levels of job displacement. Okay, and you're going to get increasing levels of productivity and efficiency. There's just no doubt about it, and that's going to further compound, I think, some of the points that you made very well. And what you're going to have to get to is really what you talked about, which I think was great, which is when you talk about skills future, easier to pronounce. You know, one of the first things I did was certainly. I wanted to be able to impact our new administration in the United States as much as I could, and I went to Washington, D.C., and I challenged President Trump, and I said, look, my number one thing that I would like you to do is to focus on 5 million apprenticeships in the United States by 2020, and that really make apprenticeships a national goal. Now, of course, I thought that he would completely resonate with the word apprentice. So I knew I had a running start on that, okay? So, and in fact he did. He said, okay, I take your challenge, we'll go for this 5 million. And why I'm excited about that is because I think that as we get increasing levels of automation, that we have got to be ready to rapidly retrain people and give them these kinds of apprenticeships or these skills future, and traditional academic means is not going to be the answer. Now, to Nick's point, they better have solid read and writing capability that you would see like in K through 12. That the foundation and the fundamentals need to be there, but if those fundamentals are there, this opportunity to create apprenticeships, whether they're coming out of that K through 8 environment or out of the high school environment, or whether they're mature workers and they need to be retrained because their jobs have been replaced. We have got to be ready to have nationalized apprenticeship programs that are deeply integrated with the structures of our economy. And companies like mine, this is something that we are really focused on. Of course, Salesforce is the world's fastest growing enterprise software company. We will do over $10 billion in revenue this year. We have over 26,000 employees. We're the #1 customer relationship management provider in the world. Everyone who's attended this conference has used Salesforce because the World Economic Forum runs on Salesforce, and all of these systems that you've been using, at the core of them is the Salesforce system. Now, because we've built a platform, what that allows us to do is to create jobs, because we are training people on how to administer and build and create and develop on that platform, much in the same way that Didi is doing it with their cars and their systems. We are doing that as well, and we predict, with a partnership with IDC, that we'll add 2 million jobs to the global economy and $400 billion in GDP by 2020 through our platform. So this idea that we need next generation platforms for growth, I think that this is something that, in my personal life, I can see is true. And I think for Didi, it's also true. And I can probably give you dozens of examples of next generation technology companies that are able to take these tech companies, create platforms, create opportunities, not just to sell you an app for your phone, but to create something that's going to give employment and subsistence for people worldwide. And I think that that's going to be something that we're going to see. That said, I've also said before, I said it in Davos in January, and I'd love to hear the economist's view on this, which is basic income, I think, will become a part of a society, and also I'm sure you've thought about that as well, but that's a super controversial thing to say, that there's going to be some kind of basic income needed, but as we get these very, very high levels of automation through artificial intelligence, we're going to have to ask ourselves, are we going to provide basic income through our government?
Well, it's a great topic to bring up with 11 minutes to go in the session, but and I do want to get Tyler's view on that. Tyler, I was going to actually ask you to build on this education element about the fact that you are an educator in multiple respects, also through your blog, Marginal Revolution and Marginal Revolution University, etc., and some vision there. But maybe you can give a 1-minute response, and I'll get the same from Jean and Tarman on basic income, because I think that's something where a lot of people are interested in the topic, and there's some very differing views from different sides on whether it's a good idea or not. So what's your kind of 30-second to 60-second take on universal basic income?
My country does not have the politics to support it, and since our politics seems to be getting worse, there's a lot of potential policy improvements I'm not optimistic about.
In an ideal world, would you think it's an experiment worth taking?
I would like to see it tried first in countries like New Zealand and Denmark and see how it goes. I think we don't know. Doing it small scale, we know works, but large scale, when all the norms change, we don't know.
Jean, what do you think about this topic, particularly around automation in China?
Sure. I would just give you an example. There's a young miner in our platform as a driver, and he has a rock and roll dream, but he works as a miner in Shanxi province. And because of his income keeps dropping every month, so he started to become our driver, so that he can drive around during daytime and also play rock and roll. He has a band. His dream is to come to Beijing. So, that's what we're trying to do here. We provide a second income to people like that. And he's a 5-star driver. So he's very good. He's on top of our driver list. So that's one example. We have many thousands, millions of examples like this. We're providing major or second income to a lot of people. There are 17 million drivers getting income from our platform last year. Among all of them, 4 million are retired, laid off workers from coal miners, steel makers, or veteran. Right? So this is what we're trying to do. And back to the, the AI, because I think the origination of this topic is about AI and whether it will replace people's job. I think, first of all, we all understand the technology will deeply transform people's life, in many ways, and it's inevitable. But all we're here, I understand, is trying to figure out how do we face it and what's the decision we are going to make. But for our industry, the AI is intelligence driving, and it's already here. Assistant parking is part of it, right? It's to make driving more safely. And back to the base income point, my view is, we need to look at what's the potential market. That's why I talked about the private car ownership. We have a huge incremental market there, but good human service is always needed. So that's the relationship here. So the existing part will be provided by good human drivers, and the incremental part is to make driving safer.
Right. Yeah. And I think that that's a really important point when we talk about AI and automation, is that the benefits of that are not cost-saving benefits; they're lives saved. That's time that can be devoted to more productive activities. Tarman, on basic income.
Well, I think, in all previous waves of technological innovation, going back 200 years or even the last 50 years, the jobs that were displaced have been more than made up for by new jobs being created, typically in a different sector, but sometimes in the same sector. The question is whether this time it'll be different. And to be honest, we don't know the answer to that. We don't know whether 20 or 25 years from now, intelligent machines and big data would have replaced more jobs than we are able to recreate to meet new demands. We just don't know the answer to that. But what we do between now and then will also shape the answer. If we introduce something like universal basic income soon, in preparation for a day which may not come, where there are not enough jobs, if we introduce it soon, we are more likely to end up in a situation where we don't have enough jobs for people. Now, this may seem a little paradoxical, but the basic impulse in public policy has to be from now right through the next decade and a half at least, to get as many people into jobs as possible, not to make it more comfortable for them to be out of a job. It has to be to get them into jobs. And the fact is the jobs are available. In every economy in the world, jobs are not being filled because of a lack of skills. Even in the United States, there are very large numbers of jobs that are going unfilled because of a lack of basic skills, middle skills, and of course the higher end skills. So that has to be our emphasis. If we make it too easy now for people to not have to get themselves trained, and we make it too easy on local politicians and entrepreneurs to not put some effort into training people up, we are more likely to end up in a situation 20, 25 years from now, where indeed people are less employable. So I'd say concentrate on the task we have from now until the next 20 years, and we are more likely then to end up in a situation where we do not have this very dire social vision, or where there are just not enough jobs for people.
Very good. In the 5 minutes we have left, and unfortunately we don't have the opportunity to bring in the audience, but I know that this is a conversation that will continue and is continuing throughout this conference in all the other sessions. I'd like to ask each of you on the panel to bring it home to those of us who are lucky enough to be here in Dalian, keeping in mind the fact that we are incredibly privileged and yet operating on behalf of not only stakeholders in developing economies who don't have anywhere near the ability to attend a World Economic Forum conference or meeting like this, but also on behalf of future generations that will inherit the resource management and policies and societies that we are creating today. With that in mind, what do we do? How do we energize ourselves individually in our daily lives, leaving here today, going back to real life and the massive emails that is stacked up over 3 days, and think, how can we make the technologies we work with, the organizations we work in, more inclusive, create that positive social benefit, that community action that Tarman talked about. Maybe I'll start with you, Mark, because as one of the biggest proponents of the stakeholder theory that I know and a great supporter of ours, you've had many ideas. But what's your call to action for the audience here in Dalian?
Well, I kind of touched on it, which is, and I mean, I can tell you what I'm doing, which is that I think that we all need to double down on our commitment to equality. I think that just kind of touching on what Nick said, you know, the World Economic Forum itself was built on this concept that companies need to be focused not just on their shareholders, but on their stakeholders. This idea of stakeholder theory, pioneered by Professor Klaus Schwab, the executive chairman and founder of the World Economic Forum, is why we are all here. And stakeholder theory at its core, I think, is a theory about equality, that we, the leaders of society, have an obligation to look out for those who are less fortunate, whether they're the less educated or those who are being discriminated against, or those that have some type of situation that prevents them from having, and I'll come back to the topic, a title, inclusive growth. We need to include everybody. And I think that if we get focused on that and create the platforms to do that, we will continue to have and will have the best levels of success that we can.
Tyler, what's your call to action?
I have simple advice, mostly for Americans. Stay open to China. How will we solve our digital divide? We will do it with super cheap Chinese smartphones. Who will make a lot of the future advances in biomedicine, in drones? WhatsApp is already better. It's like an operating system. It's better than anything the United States has. We are still underestimating the innovation potential from China. For very few voters or even intellectuals or think tanks, is openness to China a major issue? So that's my call to action. We can do it. We don't have to solve all the problems with education, though I would love to do that too, healthcare and so on. But yes, simply keeping good relations with China is actually number one on my agenda for inclusivity in addition to world peace.
Jean.
Sure. Well, I'm not going to comment on that. I will start my own one. Well, as I talked about, being inclusive means inclusive of taxi drivers. Actually, we provide 3 million rides on a daily basis to taxi drivers for free. We don't charge anything, and we also provide very sweet functions to help them locate restaurants and even toilets at a very good location. So we work with these people a lot, and I hope everyone, when you go home and when you take the taxi ride, please be very nice and thank them for their hard work. And also, if you have a private car, try to share it once a week.
Perfect, thank you. Tarman.
Well, Tyler's point was directed at the United States. Let me make the point in another way, which is that what happens here in this part of China, Dalian, the northeast, or what they call the Dongbei region, is going to tell us a lot about the solutions for the future across the world. Look at the city, highly international, both by heritage as well as the nature of its current economy. Highly innovative. They have one of the most advanced IT parks. They are an innovative society, plugged in with the world, but highly innovative. But they are part of a region in North China with an enormous rust belt. Middle-aged workers facing the risk of displacement, and the numbers are not small. The difference is, I've been here in Dalian I first came about 15 years ago. I've been here several times since. It impresses me every time I come, but the problems of the region have grown larger, like they have in the Midwest, in the United States, or anywhere else. But the difference is, everyone I speak to in national leadership and in local leadership, not a single one of them thinks that the answer is to find some ways of curbing external competition. Not a single one of them thinks that the answer is to slow down innovation and have less disruption. The answer in their minds is in social and economic policies to help those who are displaced to get back into a job or to have a decent social safety net if they're in the older age group. Journey ahead is still daunting, but they have the right policy ideas, they're free of illusions, they have some resources, and I think if there's a place in the world that'll show us the way forward, it'll be somewhere here.
Thank you, Tarman. And before I more formally thank our 4 speakers in what has been an excellent panel this afternoon, I want to just say 2 quick things. The first is to echo Murat's comments, which is to say, please do engage with us on this topic and come to San Francisco, join our communities, and engage deeply in this discussion in further work on projects very specifically on technology or on domains like oceans, which we work on with Mark and others out of the San Francisco Center, because this is an important enough topic for the future that I think we really need to put that dynamism ourselves into it. And the second point is just an offer to you. In 2016, Professor Schwab published his book, The Fourth Industrial Revolution. There is a draft follow-up copy here, which will be available at the back of the room as you leave. There's also a PDF version on TopLink. The reason I show it is because it's in draft format so that you can tell us what else should be in here. about the way that values and principles can improve the technologies that we're building and benefits all the lives of the stakeholders that we work on behalf of around the world. And with that, thank you for being a wonderful, supportive audience, and thank you to Deputy Prime Minister Tarman, Jean Liu, Mark Benioff, and my good friend Tyler Cowen. Thank you very much, everyone.